ဟုတ်ကဲ့အားလုံးပဲမင်္ဂလာပါကျွန်တော်တို့ပြီးခဲ့တဲ့1988ခုနှစ်ကမြန်မာနိုင်ငံလုံးတက္ကသိုလ်ကျောင်းသားတွေကစပြီးတော့အုံကြွခဲ့တဲ့ရေတော်ပုံကြီးမှာအားလုံးကနားထောင်နေရတဲ့စောင့်ပြီးနားထောင်နေရတဲ့ BBC ဗမာပိုင်းကသတင်းတော့ Christopher Canes ဆိုတာကြားဝေးကြမှာထင်ပါတယ်အခုမြန်မာပြည်ကစက်ကောင်စီအနေနဲ့မီဒီယာတွေကိုဖန်ဆီးတာနှိပ်ကွပ်တာထောင်ချတာညှင်းဆဲတာမီဒီယာတိုက်တွေဖျက်ဆီးတာမီဒီယာတွေကိုပိတ်ဆို့တာတွေအခြေအနေတွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ဝိုင်းရဲ့သတင်းစာဆရာကြီး Christopher Canes နဲ့သူ့ရဲ့သဘောထားချင်းချင်းချက်တွေသုံးသပ်ဆွေးနွေးတင်ပြမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ် Chris, welcome. Chris.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's very good to be here.
Yes, I think you're following what's happening in Myanmar along the Burmese Spring movement. As a journalist, what are your most interesting event in Myanmar? Because these are too many things happening at the same time over the last 3-4 months.
Well, first of all, there are significant differences, and I would say there are 4 significant differences between 1988 and now. First of all, Generation Z is fully wired and online. So massacres in Mandalay can be live streamed in Brussels, in New York, in Washington, in capitals around the world. So there's a transparency which wasn't there in 1988. In 1988, I was reporting this stuff on the BBC. People listened if they listened, but there was no social media. So there's a connectivity, which is a significant difference. Secondly, there's just been an election in which the NLD won overwhelmingly. So although in 1988 there were millions of people on the streets, there is now something which is empirically measurable. We know just how popular the NLD and other parties are. The ethnic nationality parties, for example, are. So there's absolutely no excuse for the world to say, well, you know, we don't know about these demonstrations. My second point, there's a clear, measurable election that's just been annulled. Thirdly, we have COVID. So COVID has shown to the world that until and unless COVID is eradicated everywhere, then there's a problem for all the richest countries in the world. We've just seen the G7 been meeting in London. COVID was at the top of the list. Well, while COVID is out of control and spreading inside prisons in Myanmar, all across the country, because the military junta are clearly incapable of handling a pandemic, that is a problem for all of the world. And very, very lastly, we have international law. Now, I know the wheels of international law and accountability turn very slowly. I remember being the UN spokesperson in Bosnia in the 1990s, and we had these war criminals, Karadzic, Mladic, Milosevic, all these people rushing around killing people, a bit like the junta are now inside Myanmar. And we all said, when will it ever happen? When will there be? Well, you know what? The wheels of international justice did turn. They ended up in The Hague. And I say to the people of Myanmar, do not lose hope, because although what you're going through is incredibly painful, and there's been, you know, incalculable loss, people's relatives, their friends being killed, being tortured, being raped, being massacred, that's all unforgivable. But you have to hold on to the belief that with transparency, my first point, and with international law and accountability, my last point, there can be justice one day. The junta needs to understand that they will be the subject of accountability, and the people of Myanmar have to live in the hope that one day they will have justice.
Yeah, like you mentioned, one of the photo or video from the mass murder and killing in the street could be spreading across a wall in a few seconds by the citizen journalists across the country. At the same time, many of the media house and well-known journalists are on the run or in hiding because of the informants and the special police are chasing you. Would you like to encourage something to your fellow journalists inside Myanmar, taking very serious risks now?
Indeed. Well, as director of the Myanmar Accountability Project, which is an NGO which I run with other colleagues here in London, I would like to condemn unconditionally the detention of any journalist. Journalism is not a crime. And I call for the immediate release of all journalists in Myanmar. As I say, they have done nothing wrong. They are doing their best in good faith in the most appalling circumstances to report on the fate of their country. And actually, it's not in the interests of the military junta to detain them. Whenever journalists are detained, it always backfires on the junta. I've worked in Gaza, for example, where journalists at one stage, foreign journalists, were banned. It didn't help. I've worked in all sorts of situations. All that will happen is that the military junta in Myanmar will be put by the world in the same international doghouse, we're given the same pariah status as North Korea and as other rogue regimes. If the Burmese government, if the Myanmar government had any sense at all, it would be trying to court journalists. It would be trying to get journalists to report their story. What actually they've done is they've got a guy, an old Mossad agent who they're allegedly paying millions of dollars which don't belong to them, millions of dollars of Myanmar taxpayers' money. They've got someone to do dirty work PR for them in Canada. That's going to backfire. That never works. What Myanmar needs, everyone in Myanmar needs, including the junta, is for what's happening in the country to be properly and responsibly reported. The junta will be put in the doghouse unless they do it, and the people of Myanmar have the right to understand their own story and to have their own story told, not just in the international media, but to be told by the Myanmar media in the country themselves. So I condemn the holding of journalists, the detention of journalists, and I call for their immediate and unconditional release.
Yes, but then you also talk about the Myanmar accountability project. Now we realize that there are thousands and thousands of the Burmese Burmese citizen journalists. They might have a very valuable document, footage, photo to explain how brutality and how the atrocity, the serious and unlawful crackdown, killing teenage children in the streets. Would you suggest some of those documenting all of these atrocities?
Yes, I would. I absolutely would. Yes, can I be very clear that the standard of evidence you need to bring a case in a foreign court is very, very high. So the Myanmar Accountability Project is looking for specific information. We need named individuals who are doing torture, named individuals who are committing crimes such as rape, such as inhuman and degrading acts against people in prison, in detention, and in other places. We need medical records. We need very good photographic evidence, and we need really, really authoritative eyewitness statements. So there's no point just sending me a photograph of someone being shot in the streets. That's appalling, and it's good for organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and others. It's good for journalists to be reporting these things. But what the Myanmar Accountability Project is trying to do is to bring cases in the English courts and in other courts. So we have to persuade the prosecution services in the UK, in Switzerland, in Germany, wherever, that there is an actual case to answer. So we need the names of those individuals in the security forces of Myanmar who are torturing people. We need to know the names of their victims. We need to know when the torture took place. And we need to have really good medical records and evidence about that. Because if we just go to the English system, the English prosecution service, and say, well, we've got some video, it's not very clear, but it clearly shows someone being killed or beaten up in the streets of Myanmar, they won't take us seriously. We need really, really first-class evidence. We're working on it. I can't give you the details of which cases we're working on, but one or two very high-profile cases have come up. But to be very clear, we don't need to be sent millions of images from the streets of Myanmar. We need precise, reliable, authoritative information about who the torturers are, who are the people who are committing atrocity crimes within Myanmar. When we've got that, along with medical records, good eyewitness accounts, then we're in business. Then we really can push for accountability. Then we can put out notices through Interpol for the junta for these people who are committing these appalling crimes against their own people to be brought to justice, because clearly there isn't going to be justice within Myanmar while the junta is running the law courts and when people are too terrified to speak out against them. So we will push for justice in foreign courts until the time comes where we can have justice within Myanmar.
That for the all the media circles and media halls and all the journalists inside Burma, they've been already struggling with the COVID in the last year. They're all been struggling with the financial instability and our media landscape is totally disturbed by the government, by the military, by the cronies, and all our media people are struggling over the last years. But now this time is most serious. The most serious risks we all are taken. So international community, particularly media organization around the world, how they should think about supporting those media inside Burma.
Well, first of all, I think all journalists around the world have an obligation to report fully and fairly on what's going on and to make sure that the plight of journalists and other people in Burma, in Myanmar, do not fade away from the international headlines. One of the really important lessons from 1988, their main demonstrations were July, August, then in 88, then you had the big massacres in September 1988 when the much hated Slork was brought into office. But it only took a few more months. I mean, by the following December and then January 1989, Burma was pretty much off the international headlines. So my first message to the international media is that we need to make sure that events within Myanmar, which are absolutely terrible, remain in the headlines. And that's not difficult because, quite frankly, there's a fresh headline out of Myanmar nearly every day. I mean, I follow the events relatively closely. And frankly, if I'd been a journalist still at the BBC, I could have filed a report which I think would have been widely reported, if not been in the headlines. So first of all, journalists and others around the world have to make sure that Myanmar remains in the consciousness of the international community. And that leads on to my second point, which is from these media pressures, there must be diplomatic pressure. So within the international system, you've got the UN General Assembly, which has passed a resolution demanding an arms embargo. Clearly, that needs to be properly implemented. There needs to be continual reporting of the attempts by the junta to procure arms to kill their own people. We have to make sure that Russia and China, major suppliers of arms to the military in Myanmar, are held to account. They have blocked any meaningful Security Council action. Thirdly, we have to make sure that the UN agencies working on the ground are doing their job. There's been a recent report done by a colleague of mine on the Myanmar Accountability Project, Damien Lilly. He's one of the most respected protection officials, long experience of doing human rights protection in the international system. And Damien Lilly's report is very clear. There was systemic failures of the UN, there were failures of leadership, there was confusion over mandate. You had the mass displacement from the garment district in Yangon of tens of thousands of people under the very nose of a huge UN presence, thousands of UN workers in Yangon. Nothing was done. Huge displacement at a time of COVID, no reporting, no case studies, no legal aid, no psychosocial support, nothing. So the UN needs also to be fixed. But let me make the point finally that the window of opportunity for Myanmar is closing. And unless it's all hands to the deck, unless everybody, so anyone that can do anything in a national court, anyone who can do anything to raise awareness amongst their local MPs, their local politicians, unless journalists from around the world can hold hands with civil society in Myanmar, civil society in their own countries, including, by the way, in ASEAN countries, where, despite the uselessness of the ASEAN non-intervention policy, there are very active civil society organizations. So everyone must now work to make sure that on the legal front, the diplomatic front, the humanitarian front, the development front, the media front, everyone is doing everything they can to hold the generals in Myanmar to account and to keep the story of the people of Myanmar who were being butchered on a daily basis, to keep that in the conscience of the international community.
Thank you very much, Chris.